Let's talk about terrain. The main types of terrain that you're going to see in most games are woods. We can put some trees on there. Water of various depths. I like to use a lighter felt for shallower waters. Hills. And buildings. I just got these felts from Joann Fabrics, and you can too. And this is how I like to play. But you don't have to have these fancy HeroScape tiles or even this to play the game. If you want a hill, you can simply find a book. And then to maintain the immersion, throw a blanket over it. And there, you got your hill. You also don't need to have this fancy cardboard building. You can just grab some kind of can and throw it down on the table, and there you go. Heck, you could, if your table's set for dinner, you could just play BattleTech with the table set for dinner. That'll work just fine. Also, I believe that you can make these buildings out of paper. Like, you don't even need the cardboard. The BattleTech Wiki, also known as Sarna, has a file someplace where you can print off buildings like this and then fold them up, and they work pretty well. Now let's talk about how we move through terrain. First, you're going to need the movement costs table, which is right here. If you bought the Alpha Strike box, you got all the tables that you'll need here. Well, most of them. This movement cost table is a little smaller than this one. I got these from the back of the book. I just printed them out and copied and pasted them, scanned them to make this. Let's learn how to move through clear terrain first, which is all this. Any terrain without anything on it is clear terrain. We'll use a Wolverine for the demonstration. I've got the card right here. This Wolverine has a movement value of 10-inch J, which means it can walk 10 inches or jump 10 inches. Up to 10 inches, that is. There are at least 3 different movement modes. Standard movement, which uses a white die, standstill movement, which uses a black die, and jumping, which uses a red die. We'll get into more about the whys of that in a bit. Last thing you're going to need is a cool tape measure. You probably won't have one as cool as mine, because yours most likely won't have an Orion on it. So, 10 inches. Now, there's inches of movement speed, and then there's inches of distance traversed across the table. And right now, since it's clear terrain, movement speed used up and inches across the table will be the same. So let's say I just want to move forward 10 inches. Start measuring at the front of the base, move up 10 inches, and I end at the front of the base. And then because I moved at least 1 inch, I'm using the standard ground movement, and I use the white die. The target movement modifier for this Wolverine is 2. So I put 2 pips up on the die, and I place that down. And what this is telling us is that the Wolverine is +2 harder to hit. And it reminds us that we used standard ground movement, which is important, because using standard ground movement makes everything +0 harder to hit. Now let's say we want to use the standstill ground movement. That means we moved less than an inch. So if you just move a little bit, or if we just turn and we end, that's standstill. We use the black die, and we put 6 pips up. 6 means 0, because there's no 0 on the die, and very few things have a TMM of 6. So that means this mech is +0 harder to be shot at, and everything is -1 easier for it to shoot at, because it's easier to shoot things if you're not moving. These are modifier die. They help us keep track of modifiers, so we don't have to remember them all. Jumping, 10-inch J, so he can jump up to 10 inches in any direction, in a straight line. Because mechs can't, like, fly around. They can only jump in straight lines. So say we jump, we went at least an inch. We use the red die, and it gets its target movement modifier of 2 plus 1, because jumping things are really hard to shoot. Put the red die down with a TMM of 3 up. So, the Wolverine is plus 3 harder to be shot at, and everything else is plus 2 harder for the Wolverine to shoot at, because it's hard to shoot at things when you're jumping. Now let's talk about turning. Turning is free. It doesn't cost any movement speed. So say we want to make a turn, we just turn the measuring tape, put our finger down, bam, and then put it down. We moved. Yeah. We can also change facing for free. That doesn't cost any speed. And that's the basics of moving through clear terrain. Let's talk about moving through woods. Woods cost extra speed. So if we want to move 1 inch into the woods, it's going to cost us 1 inch of movement speed for moving 1 inch. And then another 1 inch of movement speed for the woods being there. The woods slowed us down. So moving this 1 inch of distance across the table cost us 2 inches of movement speed. And if we want to move another inch, same thing. Another 2 inches of movement speed gone. In order for us to leave the woods, it only costs us 1 inch because there's clear terrain there. We don't pay extra movement speed to leave the woods. Now let's talk about moving through levels. We'll call this a 1 inch hill. It's close enough to an inch. Alright. Let's say the Wolverine wants to move 1 inch up the hill. It'll cost 1 inch to move an inch, and then 2 more inches of movement speed for the 1 inch level change. So moving this 1 inch of distance cost 3 inches of movement speed. And then the rest of this on this hill is just clear terrain. Moving down the hill costs the same amount. 1 inch to move 1 inch, 2 inches to go down 1 inch, 3 inches. Boom. Alright, and now that we know how level changes work, we are ready to move through water. Let's say this is a depth 1 water area. So it's going to cost us 1 inch to go an inch, 2 inches to go down 1 inch, and then 1 inch for the water being there. Moving this 1 inch of distance cost us 4 inches of movement speed. Now, if I want to continue walking along the bottom of the water, I don't have to pay for the level change because I already paid for it. So moving 1 more inch would be 1 inch for the inch, and then 1 inch for the water being there, 2 inches. And that's how moving through depth 1 water works. Moving on to talking about buildings, the simplest way to play with buildings is to just treat them as indestructible hills, and then you just treat them like level changes. But we do have rules for destroying buildings, walking through buildings, and standing on buildings. Some buildings are stronger than others. Some mechs are heavier than others. Depending on the strength of the building, it might not be able to hold up a mech. Now, there's also jumping to consider. Jumping ignores everything, basically. If you want to jump onto a 1 inch hill, where'd my mech go? Here it is. You just jump onto it. So, let's see. He can jump 10 inches in any straight line. And terrain doesn't affect it. You don't have to pay any extra to jump up there. If he say he wants to jump 4 inches like that just costs 4 inches of movement speed. That's it. And the way these guys jump is because his jumping movement is 10 inches, he technically jumps 10 inches up into the air, and then he goes 10 inches that way, and then goes 10 inches back down. So if there were, say, a 20-inch hill, this guy could not jump over it. But if he were on a 20-inch hill, he could jump down, because the jump jets just cushion your fall. That's how the game used to work back when the rule book looked like one of these. Now, however, that the rule book looks like this, there has been a slight change to the jumping rules on page 38. Now, a mech can only jump vertically up to half of its jumping movement rate. For example, if a mech has a jumping rate of 10 inches J, that means it can jump vertically up to 5 inches, but it can still jump horizontally up to 10 inches. As for the woods, same thing. So let's say we're in this situation and he wants to jump 10 inches and land in the woods. He can do that. Jumping ignores terrain costs. Even for water. Same thing. You just jump in the water. It doesn't cost anything extra. And that's how movement works.